If you've heard about the Dr. Phil bad baby, Turnabout Ranch accusations, but you still don't really know exactly what's going on, this is part 1. This article title basically summarizes the issue in short. For years, Dr. Phil has sent troubled teens to a treatment ranch, and they allege they were mistreated there. This all actually began with Hannah Archuleta, a former teen resident of the ranch.
If I had to give my mom a letter grade for being a parent, I would give her an E.
So this was Hannah's experience. This is her quote. Within 2 weeks at Turnabout Ranch, a male staff member came up behind me and suddenly grabbed my butt. I decided not to tell anyone because I was scared of being punished, and I hoped that he would not touch me again. Sadly, I was wrong. What ended up happening was when she did report it the second time after it happened, they took no remedial action. In fact, Hannah claims the staff members actually retaliated and punished her for it. Like for part 2 where I talk about what the staff made Hannah do as punishment.
Dr. Phil is worth $460 million, but it's important to remember he's not an actual doctor. And to get into Dr. Phil, he's had a show for 18 seasons where the main topic is psychology. And the show is called Dr. Phil, so most people will be led to believe that Dr. Phil is an actual psychiatrist. Similar to how Judge Judy spent 10 years as a prosecutor and 6 years as an actual judge. But for Dr. Phil, he's a PhD, not an MD, and that's actually a huge difference. Big reason is that medical schools only have an average acceptance rate of 6.3%, and the average GPA is of 3.9. Dr. Phil got his PhD from the University of North Texas, where the average acceptance rate is 74%. And calling yourself a doctor on TV is one thing, but Dr. Phil's been linked to a lot of sketchy activity. He endorsed a weight loss scam in 2003 that in 2006 had to pay a $10.5 million legal settlement for fraud. In 2008, he visited Britney Spears in a mental hospital saying it was for an intervention, but her doctor said it did nothing of the sort and just made her a public spectacle. He also left alcohol in Todd Herzog's room before their interview discussing addiction. He has an entertaining show and has made $460 million from it, but Phil McGraw is just not a doctor.
It's time to have a serious conversation about Dr. Phil. Phil McGraw has contributed to the abuse of children as his show has run for the last 15 years. First of all, a child's mental health is not adult entertainment. I can't even begin to imagine how much work goes into writing contracts that don't break HIPAA laws. Dr. Phil talks about sending his guests to self-help places. The programs that he sends kids to are owned by the Aspen Education Group. Programs under this group's care collectively have thousands of abuse complaints. On top of that, deaths have occurred at every one of these programs. Just a few days ago, Danielle Bergoli, also known as Bad Baby, came out with her story. She also shared and supported Hannah Archuleta's story. This is all in the wake of Paris Hilton coming forward in her documentary, This is Paris. Because of them, Breaking Code Silence has taken off this year, and survivors of institutionalized child abuse like me are so thankful. So Dr., or should I say Mr., because you haven't recertified since 2006, Phil, where's the accountability? Let's tag him and find out.
Turnabout Ranch, which is a very serious, responsible place for kids to go.
It's such a great ranch, right? Torture, murder, almost 2 murders, sexual assault. You don't watch the fucking news. Stop acting like you don't watch the fucking news.
I try to be an emotional compass and point parents in a direction.
What fucking direction is that? Sexual abuse, murders, and fucking torture? That's the direction? Oh,
Hi friends. So I'm starting a new series talking about all the reasons why I think that Dr. Phil is not the lovable TV psychologist that we are all so familiar with. I have a lot of issues with Dr. Phil, ranging from the blatant exploitation of the guests that he invites onto his show, to the verified reports of him being inappropriate with a past patient, scamming his trusted viewers, as well as regularly inviting predators onto his platform to gain sympathy from his audience. I could talk about this for hours, so let's get started. So Phil McGraw, aka Dr. Phil, is a well-known TV host who has been on the air for the past 20 years. He has a PhD in clinical psychology, but he is not licensed to practice in any state in the US. So that we can better understand why this man is no longer licensed to practice, we're gonna need to rewind all the way back to 1988. So when Dr. Phil was 38 years old, he was working as a therapist in a private practice that he shared with his father in Texas. During this time, Dr. Phil made a huge mistake by hiring one of his patients who was a 19-year-old female to work for him at his practice. This issue alone raised a red flag that caused the Texas State Board of Examiners of Psychologists to become involved, as this is a massive ethical violation. During their investigation, this 19-year-old patient shared with the board that she and Dr. Phil had engaged in a brief physical relationship as well as a codependent relationship. According to this patient, after beginning treatment with Dr. Phil, he became overly involved in her life and went as far as to call her multiple times a day, demand what her whereabouts were, and even wanted to know what time she went to bed at night. She also shared an instance where she had an amazing opportunity to work for one of her professors at her college at Houston University, but when sharing this opportunity with Dr. Phil during one of their sessions, he reportedly did everything in his power to persuade her to work for him instead. She reported how she felt trapped and felt like her therapist had become dependent on her. And I will note that Dr. Phil was married to his current wife, Robin, during this time. Concluding their investigation, the Texas State Board publicly reprimanded Dr. Phil for his actions, and they also required that every single one of Dr. Phil's therapy sessions would need to be supervised for a full year before he could resume his normal one-on-one sessions. The Texas State Board's full report is still available online today. The board was also requiring that Dr. Phil had to take ethics classes before he could resume his practice. He had no interest in doing any of these things, so he simply moved and opened a consulting firm. 2006 was the year that Dr. Phil officially surrendered his license, but he was cited for practicing psychology without a license or certification in 2008. When you watch the Dr. Phil show, you will often hear him say to his guests, "I can't diagnose you in the short time we have together." But in reality, he cannot diagnose anyone with anything, period. He's completely unlicensed. This is literally just the tip of the iceberg. In part 2, we'll talk more about some of the victims he has invited onto his show to exploit. Hi friends, welcome to episode 2 of my Dr. Phil series. In episode 1, we took a glimpse into Dr. Phil's problematic past, but today I want to take a moment and recognize some of the victims who have been personally exploited by Dr. Phil and his show. Let's start with Shelley Duvall's 2016 episode. For those of you who don't know, Shelley Duvall is an actress who is best known for her role as Wendy in The Shining. Not only did Dr. Phil make a mockery of this woman's very obvious mental health crisis, he was extremely condescending to her, and he lied straight to her face when Shelley asked what his real credentials were. The episode was taken off air after it was met with massive criticism from Dr. Phil's viewers, as well as multiple A-list celebrities and directors. I'm not going to show the promo that they aired for this episode because I think it's extremely disrespectful and a horrendous piece of film, but I do want to show you a clip from this episode where Dr. Phil blatantly lies about his credentials. I apologize for the bad quality. Dr. Phil and his team have been trying to remove all traces of this episode from the internet for years.
Love you, David Mamet. Are you a policeman? Investigator?
No, ma'am.
Well, what do you do?
I'm a doctor.
With his own TV show.
You're very sweet.
Dr. Phil is not a doctor, as we discussed in episode 1. He is not even a licensed psychologist. In February of last year, about 5 years after the original episode aired, Shelley was interviewed and she was asked what her experience with Dr. Phil was like. She responded that she had to find out what kind of person he was the hard way. Up next, we have Britney Spears. In 2008, Britney was strapped to a gurney and taken by ambulance to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center after a custody standoff between police and her ex-husband. Upon arrival at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, she was involuntarily admitted for monitoring. The next day, while Britney was packing to leave, her mother, Lynn, called her friend Robin McGraw and asked if Dr. Phil would come to Britney's hospital room and speak with her as a professional favor. Dr. Phil came to Britney's room and spoke with her very briefly, long enough for her to walk from her room to the front door of the hospital. Then he turned around and gave this statement to the press. "My meeting with Britney and some of her family members this morning in her room at Cedars leaves me convinced more than ever that she is in a dire need of both medical and psychological intervention. I'm very concerned for her." He also expressed his frustration that the staff at Cedars-Sinai did not force Britney to stay in that hospital longer than she wanted to. Dr. Phil's statement just perpetuated the story that the media was trying so hard to push at the time, that Britney had lost her mind. And if Dr. Phil truly believes he's a doctor and helping Britney, why on earth would he give the press a shred of information about her? The reason Dr. Phil does everything he does is to benefit himself, which is why he is the most dangerous person to be playing the role of a mental health professional. Britney Spears lost custody of her 2 baby boys a few days after Dr. Phil made this statement, and her conservatorship became active. Hi friends, welcome to episode 3 of my Dr. Phil series. First things first, I want to direct you all to this page. This is a woman who was personally victimized by Dr. Phil and his television show. She is extremely brave for sharing her experience, and her story deserves to be heard. But today I want to talk about a man who was exploited and manipulated by Dr. Phil and his staff to a degree that is beyond horrific. In 2013, Survivor winner Todd Herzog was invited to be a guest on the Dr. Phil show. After Todd had won Survivor, he dealt with some very dark times battling a very serious alcohol addiction. The way that Dr. Phil presented this episode was beyond shocking, and millions of people tuned in to watch. Here's a brief clip of Todd's episode.
Nice to meet you.
How you feeling, man? Can you walk?
Barely. I have to have help.
All right.
Sorry, I'm very...
That's all right. Brandon, why don't you get over there and take Debbie's spot?
Gotcha. Yeah, I'll go. I'm sorry, I'm crying because I just can't believe this is happening, so...
Todd was obviously extremely inebriated to the point that he could not walk or stand unassisted. He could not consent to being filmed at this point. Under no circumstances should the crew have moved forward with filming with Todd in this state. About 5 years after this episode aired, Todd decided to speak up and share what really went on behind the scenes. And with the information that Todd shared with us, we were able to look at this situation from a much more sinister perspective.
I show up to the studios and I'm sober, I'm hurting a lot and I'm shaking. My dad was there and I went and talked to him in his dressing room and I was completely sober. And then they pull me into my dressing room and there was 2 liters of vodka and like some Red Bulls and orange juice and stuff like that. You know, being unsupervised by my parents, I drank the entire bottle. And then at some point somebody gave me a Xanax. They said, this will calm your nerves. And so I had been drinking and took a Xanax, which I've never taken Xanax before in my life. And I know that can be a deadly combination, so why it was given to me,
Dr. Phil's team set this man up for public humiliation and risked his life so that they could get good TV. When Dr. Phil and his team were asked about the situation, they denied all allegations. In a statement, they pointed out that addicts are notorious for lying, trivializing, and deflecting. Any true mental health professional would understand that these stereotypes are disgusting and harmful. Despite the trauma he endured at the hands of the Dr. Phil show, Todd has been successfully sober since 2017. Todd also married his fiancée Jessie in November of 2020. That's all I have for episode 3. I'll see you guys in episode 4. Hi friends, welcome to episode 4 of my Dr. Phil series. Today I want to speak about a topic that goes beyond the point of the manipulation and the exploitation of guests. I want to talk about the horrific treatment centers that Dr. Phil is sending people to, primarily children and minors. Dr. Phil has been profiting off of the troubled teen genre for decades, but it goes even deeper than that. Dr. Phil is allegedly profiting every single time he sends one of these troubled teens away to a treatment center when he's fully aware of the horrors that are going on behind closed doors. Danielle Bregoli was one of the many people who faced abusive conditions at a treatment facility recommended by Dr. Phil. The first time we met Danielle was in 2016 when she was 13 years old. Many remember her as the Catch Me Outside girl. Danielle's mother brought her on the show to talk with Dr. Phil about Danielle's out-of-control behavior. Dr. Phil's solutions to the problem that Danielle was facing was to send her to a treatment facility called Turnabout Ranch for a total of 6 months. After Danielle returned, she launched herself into a music career under the stage name Bad Baby. But in March of last year, Danielle made the brave decision to come forward and share what really happened to her at Turnabout Ranch. I'm going to show you a few clips from the video she released detailing her experience at Turnabout Ranch, but I encourage you to watch the full video over on her YouTube when you have time.
So for the first 3 days you're there is no showering. They put you in a circle, which is it's a teepee. It's a little teepee, but it's open. And you have to sit there for 3 days. They wouldn't let me lay down for nothing. Like, I was falling asleep and they were like, get up, get up. So I'm just sitting here like, this is gonna be really bad. They take away like necessity privileges, like sleeping on a bed, eating good food, not being cold. You reported another kid like getting bullied by like their peers or something, they would just say, well, maybe that's what they need or like something like that. Even though there was written rules, if a staff was angry at the moment or if you just did something that they felt was bad, you would get your own punishment. Like they would make up their own punishment for you. So it's really frustrating. You walk in the arena for hours on end. You sit outside in the cold on the floor. You have to pick up piles in a wheel. A lot of crazy things happen. I seen a kid get held down for trying to leave. Just honestly, I don't think he was trying to run away. I think he was just trying to like walk out the door and just like get some time to himself, and they restrained him. They held him down. They had no problem holding kids down, which is against the law. You're not supposed to touch the kids, but they had no problem doing that. I'm not really sure why Dr. Phil still sends kids here. It really doesn't make sense. Like, are you trying to help them or are you trying to hurt them even more?
Danielle also shared that in 2017, while she was staying at Turnabout Ranch, a staffer was unalived by another teen in the program while he was trying to flee from Turnabout Ranch. Danielle described the situation as being extremely traumatic for her as well as other minors in the program. Turnabout Ranch has lawsuits dating back to 2012. Yet to this day, Dr. Phil still recommends it to parents of troubled minors. A television entertainer should never have the power to send minors to any kind of mental health facility under any circumstances. That's it for episode 4, but we have a lot more to cover. Hi friends, welcome back to episode 5 of my Dr. Phil series. In episode 4, we talked about Danielle Bregoli's experience on the Dr. Phil show and the trauma she endured at Turnabout Ranch. Today I want to talk about another teenage girl who was victimized at Turnabout Ranch and why her testimony is so important. And before we begin, I want to remind you that Turnabout Ranch in Utah markets itself as a Christian residential treatment program for troubled teens. In 2019, 2 years after the murder had taken place at Turnabout Ranch, during Danielle Bregoli's stay, Dr. Phil sent another teenage girl named Hannah Archuleta to the ranch. Hannah was 17 years old when she appeared on the Dr. Phil show. On her episode, Hannah shared that she was severely struggling with her mental health to the point that she had thoughts of harming herself. She was also having to come to terms with the fact that her mother was terminally ill and she would have to endure life without her. Dr. Phil's solution to Hannah's mental health struggles was to remove her from her parents and send her to Turnabout Ranch for at least 30 days. After only 2 weeks of staying at Turnabout Ranch, Hannah was SA'd multiple times on multiple different occasions by a male staff member. When Hannah finally had the courage to speak out about what happened to a staff member who she thought she could trust, this is what she says happened. I experienced retaliation from the ranch after I spoke up, and what appeared to me to be punishment for reporting my abuse. I was required to spend extra time picking up horse manure, walking in circles around a horse corral, and sitting at a desk facing a wall for hours. I also had to do forced labor outside in below freezing temperatures and sleep on a wooden plank with no pillow. Turnabout Ranch did not inform police or Hannah's parents about what had taken place. Hannah's parents had absolutely no idea about what happened to their daughter until Hannah wrote them a letter begging for their help. As soon as Hannah's father found out what happened, he traveled from Colorado to Utah to remove his daughter from the program, and they immediately went to the police. Not long after this incident, Hannah and her family hired Gloria Allred as their attorney, and they sued Dr. Phil and Turnabout Ranch as well as CBS for assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, as well as negligent hiring and supervision. In a statement, attorney Gloria Allred shared that this lawsuit was long overdue considering Turnabout Ranch's highly problematic past. The solution to any teen's mental health struggles is to never put them in a situation where they're going to be abused. Dr. Phil has a massive level of responsibility here, as there are lawsuits dating back all the way to 2012 with claims of physical, psychological, and emotional abuse taking place at the ranch that he speaks so highly of on his show. Someone was murdered at this ranch 2 years before Hannah was sent there. That story made national news, and there's absolutely no way Dr. Phil and his team were not aware of it. Turnabout Ranch is still operating today, and Dr. Phil has yet to cut ties with the facility. That's all I have for episode 5, but in episode 6, we'll talk about the way Dr. Phil shows teens that consent doesn't matter to him, and if he wants them in a program, they're going, even if it's against their will. Hi friends, I am back with episode 6 of my Dr. Phil series. In episode 5, we wrapped up our discussion about some of the horrors that have gone on behind closed doors at Turnabout Ranch. Today I want to talk about some of the unethical methods that Dr. Phil and his team use to forcibly remove minors from their home to attend these highly problematic troubled teen programs. There have been dozens of Dr. Phil episodes featuring teens who are struggling with their mental health, but Dr. Phil has a funny way of villainizing these teens when they are clearly in need of love, support, structure, and a safe environment to heal. Instead of offering these things, Dr. Phil tells parents that the only option for their teen is to send them away to these horrendous programs like Turnabout Ranch, whether the teen consents to it or not. When minors do not agree to attend these programs, Dr. Phil and his team will convince the parents to sign over their guardianship temporarily to a group of people who work with Dr. Phil called transporters. The job of these transporters is to remove the teen from their home or from the Dr. Phil studio to attend whatever program that Dr. Phil wants them in. I'm going to show you a few clips of these transporters in action, and you'll see multiple examples of teens losing their ability to consent because of the power that a television host and his team have over them.
We're here to take you to Dr. Phil, honey. I love you.
Madison.
My mom and I already agreed that that's not happening.
Your mom just came in here and told you she changed the plan.
Go out of my room! Stop trying to touch me! No, if I want to get out of my bed, let me get out of my bed! I don't care! Get off of me! Get off of me!
Cover yourself up.
No!
Here's what's gonna happen. We're gonna walk to the car. It's outside.
I will literally kick and scream until you let me go. I refuse to go.
You are enrolled and you will be arriving. How do you want to arrive? Maturely, like a young lady treated with dignity and
I'm
respect,
not going.
or immaturely kicking and screaming?
I'm not going.
You are paving a path for yourself that is taking you literally nowhere right now.
We're gonna get going right now, okay?
Well, I don't want to.
Well, just come on, let's just take a walk and we're gonna go out here and we'll talk about all this, okay?
To the people who watch Dr. Phil regularly, if seeing a minor in distress is entertainment to you, I seriously consider that you reevaluate yourself. When you take away the ability for a teenager to give consent, you are setting them up for a long list of issues in the future. Teaching an impressionable mind that someone who has money, fame, and power can rip away your ability to consent and then have the world applaud them for it is a very dangerous thing. Because a teen is struggling with their mental health does not give Dr. Phil or his staff the right to traumatize them. That added trauma is going to exacerbate whatever mental health issues are underlying. Any mental health professional would know this, but Dr. Phil cares much more about ratings and views than the human beings he's using to get those ratings and views. That's all I have for episode 6. I'll see you guys in episode 7. Hi friends, I know it's been a while since I've made a video for my Dr. Phil series, but I am back to share another example of how problematic Dr. Phil and his team truly are. Today I want to talk about a Dr. Phil guest who has special needs and was purposefully humiliated on national television and put in a terrible situation by Dr. Phil and his staff. Back in February of 2020, a 24-year-old woman named Gabby was invited onto the show along with a married couple. Gabby had been dishonest with this couple whom she had met online and told them she was pregnant and promised to let them adopt her unborn child. Gabby never asked this couple for money or gifts, so technically she did not break any laws or do anything to legally classify this situation as a scam. Ultimately, Gabby was never pregnant. She was actually infertile and chronically ill. She is not expected to even live past the age of 30 years old. Gabby's father, who was also invited onto the show, explained that his daughter has bipolar disorder, suffers from psychosis, has a learning disability, as well as other special needs. He also shared that Gabby was mercilessly bullied all throughout school simply for being different. He also explained that his wife and Gabby's mother had just passed away a few years prior, which really seemed to exacerbate Gabby's mental health issues. Knowing that information, I want to show you a clip of how Dr. Phil chose to introduce her to his audience.
Well, this mastermind is actually a 24-year-old unemployed woman who sits in her bedroom all day long. Her name is Gabby, and she's here today.
After spending hours backstage telling staff that she did not want to be filmed nor be a part of the show, a producer finally convinced her to go out on stage, and it is very obvious that she was absolutely terrified.
I am not. No, babe. I don't want to. I know you don't. But yes, you do. You're going to be fine. I'm here with you. I'm here with you. You're going to be absolutely fine, babe. You're going to be absolutely fine. I'm here. I'm here.
Instead of recognizing that this was a very layered situation that deserved to be looked at with empathy, Dr. Phil decided to make Gabby out to be the villain. Dr. Phil and his staff called Gabby one of the most volatile and difficult guests that they had ever had on their show, when it was very obvious from watching the episode that Gabby was having trouble processing her emotions due to the extreme pressure of being constantly cornered by producers and cameras, when she had expressed over a dozen times that she did not want to be filmed or on the show. Gabby was extremely remorseful for her actions and apologized to the couple that she had hurt, but this apology was not taken seriously by Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil always seems to have a bad guy front and center of every episode, an antagonist versus the protagonist. But when we're dealing with mental health issues, the bad guy is typically the person who's hurting the most and in most need of understanding and resources. I'm not excusing Gabby's behavior. What she did was wrong and hurtful, and she should be held accountable. But the pursuit of accountability should never have looked like that.